Hello and welcome to Minnesota Legislative Report. I'm your host, WDSC News and Public Affairs producer Greg Grell. Well, progress continues to be made in St. Paul as lawmakers enter the stretch run to the end of the 2013 legislative session. What issues are you most concerned about in St. Paul? Now is your opportunity to ask lawmakers about any and all issues being considered at the state capitol. We have two phone numbers that you can call. Locally, dial 218-788-2844 with your questions. Or if you're calling from outside the Duluth calling area, use our toll-free number, which is 1-877-307-8762. You can also send your question in an email to askmlr@wdsc.org. And now let's introduce the lawmakers who are joining us in the WDSC studio. And immediately to my left, Representative Tom Huntley, a Democrat from Duluth. Welcome back, Representative Huntley.
Good to be here.
Also here, Representative Mary Murphy, a Democrat from Hermantown. And Representative Erik Simonson, a Democrat from Duluth. And thanks for being here also, Representative Simonson. It's good to have all of you here today, and hopefully we'll get a lot of questions from viewers. Representative Huntley, this is the first time you've been on this session, and some very major legislation actually passed in March because it had to be signed before the end of March, and that was the health insurance exchanges. Minnesota is setting up its own health insurance exchange. Now, this is a pretty complex law, so I don't expect you to explain every nuance, but give people kind of the basics, what that's going to mean and how citizens will use that exchange.
Well, basically, it's set up to do the same thing Minnesota Care did for working people that either don't get insurance where they work or can't afford the insurance at their work. And what the exchange will be is a marketplace that you can go on basically on the internet and search through the plans that are available. They'll be the benefit packages will be fairly well regulated so that you can compare one plan to another. And then you can purchase that right off the internet if you want. If you're not familiar with using computers, though, you can go to either social workers or other people that can help you get through the process. And then based on your income, you will be eligible for certain subsidies. If you're fairly low income, then most of your insurance will be paid for, just the same way that Minnesota Care has been doing it for 20 years. So it's an attempt then to make the marketplace a little simpler for most people, a little easier to understand. And it should, nationally, it's going to reduce the number of uninsured by a significant portion. In Minnesota, we feel we'll be down to about 2 or 3% uninsured instead of the 9% we're at right now.
Now, this passed pretty much on a straight party line vote in both the House and the Senate. Very little, if any, Republican support. What would be the reasoning not to pass this? If we hadn't done this, the federal government would have set up an exchange for us, correct?
Well, yeah, if we don't do it, the federal government will do it. We think, and so did the Chamber of Commerce, so they did not ultimately support the bill we had, but they thought that Minnesota would be better off doing their own exchange. And the Minnesota healthcare system is much different than most of the rest of the country. There's maybe 3 or 4 other states that are very similar to us: Washington, Oregon, Connecticut, Vermont, and partly in Maine. We have very similar types of healthcare systems, and we're more efficient. We do a better job. Our docs and hospitals are cheaper than most of the rest of the country, and so we want a system that recognizes that we're different than most of the rest of the country, and so therefore it's much better for the state of Minnesota to run their own exchange.
Now, I can't ask you to put yourself in the seats of the Republicans who didn't vote for this bill, but what possible reason would there be? Are they thinking that perhaps the federal government won't follow through on this, or why wouldn't they want to support a bill like this?
Well, they think that the federal government won't be able to afford to do what they said they're going to do, and the federal government is going to pay this subsidy. So what we used to spend on Minnesota Care, most of Minnesota won't have to spend that anymore because the federal government will pick it up. We're also, prior to the exchange bill, there was a bill that expanded medical assistance, which the feds will pay initially 100% of. And so we're going from about 100% of poverty up to 138% of poverty starting next January. And the feds will pick up initially 100% of that cost instead of the 50% they normally pay for medical assistance, and then that will phase down to about 90% over the next 10, 15 years. But still, the feds are going to pay 90% as that goes down. Now, a lot of Republicans feel that the government won't live up, the federal government won't live up to their promises. I think they will. You know, we passed Medicare in 1985, and there's always been discussion and threats to not fully fund it, but it always gets funded.
And one question viewers might have, and then we'll move on to other issues and get our other lawmakers involved, is that how would this affect you if you already receive health insurance through your work? Is this going to impact you at all, or is this more for people who don't have insurance?
If you have, particularly if you're working for a large company that has what's called self-insurance, which means they're bearing the full risk of their insurance, and they just hire an insurance company to manage the paperwork. And roughly half the people who have insurance are in that kind of system, and they're really not going to be affected at all.
Okay, that sounds good. Representative Murphy.
Talk about accessibility for people that don't have computers.
I mean, the exchange will have staff that can either help you over the phone or direct you places to go. We know that the county social workers are still going to be determining eligibility. There are some things in this system that make it more efficient than our current system, because the exchange will now determine eligibility not only for subsidies in the exchange, but also determine whether you're eligible for public programs like medical assistance or Minnesota Care. Minnesota Care is going to continue at least for another year.
And as we've been discussing healthcare, we did get a call in from Karen in Duluth, and she's wondering, Representative Huntley, will the coverage you buy from the Minnesota Health Exchange cover more than Minnesota Care does?
Right now, Minnesota Care, if you're basically an adult, you have what's called a $10,000 hospital cap, which is very bad because you go one night in the hospital, it could be $10,000 right there, and that cap is going to go away. In the federal programs on medical assistance, for instance, there is no hospital cap, and we are changing Minnesota Care this year to remove that hospital cap, so the benefit program will be pretty much the same as a regular health insurance policy.
All right, and it's likely we may get some more questions about health care, but let's move to some other issues. And Representative Simonson, I'm going to get you involved here. You serve on the tax committee, and there's been a lot of debate this session about taxes. The governor, in fact, had put forth a very broad tax plan early on in the session, got a lot of criticism. That kind of got knocked back. Give us a little update on where we're at with tax law right now, what potential changes people may see as we get closer to the end of the session.
Well, you know, that's a great question, and this really has been, you know, as complicated as healthcare is, this is equally as complicated, and but it certainly has a lot of attention to Minnesotans. The House has passed their tax bill, our omnibus bill, passed off the floor last week, and I think the Senate might have passed theirs yesterday, or maybe it's tomorrow. I don't know. I lose track of the days, but I think you're going to see some differences in the bills that have been passed, and there's obviously some differences in what the governor had proposed initially and what he's shifted to now. So I think once we see the Senate plan tax bill passed off the floor, then we can get a sense of where everybody's at and where we're going to move to. But personally, I think our plan is the best one I've seen so far. I think it does the things that we promised Minnesotans that we would do, and it moves us in a direction that's good for Minnesota.
Can you give us a few details of what changes are in that plan, or
Sure.
how it's going to work?
Yep, sure. You know, basically that plan does three big pieces that we said that we would do for Minnesota. One, it pays back our schools. It pays back the shift, fully pays back the shift. Two, it invests in the middle class, and we do that primarily through property tax relief. And 3, it makes a significant new money investment in education going forward. And you know, I've heard it said a number of times that this is our year to invest in education for Minnesota, and that's really what we feel the future of Minnesota is by rebuilding our education system and making some significant investments there. So in terms of property tax, you know, and relief and things like that, you know, we had to come up with a way to pay for that. There's no way to get around it, although in some areas we had significant spending reductions, and you know, Tom can unfortunately speak to that. We had to come up with a way to generate new revenues if we want to make these investments, if we want to pay back our kids, and we want to, you know, reduce the burden on middle class. The only way that we can do that is by generating new revenues. So we're targeting, you know, clearly the upper percentage of Minnesotans in terms of income levels. We don't have a big broad sales tax reform, but we do have a one-time surcharge on the upper 0.5% of Minnesotans that will pay back our shift.
All right, Representative Murphy, you've served in the legislature for a long time. What is your feeling about the changes that are being made in tax law this session if they do go ahead and are passed? The House now has passed its version.
I think it leads to more stability, and it pays off our debts, and it's fairer. And people are always talking about fairness. And I think the investments that we've made and the new approaches that we're making, especially property tax, makes it fairer.
Now, one of the things being considered is a new income tax rate for the richest, I guess, Minnesotans, 9.85%. And Mark from Hermantown is wondering if Dayton and the DFL legislature does pass that, will people stop saying that high-income Minnesotans aren't paying their fair share? Representative Simonson, maybe you'd like to comment about that. There's been a lot of debate about that higher tax rate.
There is a lot of debate about it. There's a lot of discussion about it, because if you really look at the effective tax rates and compare middle class to the wealthier class, middle class is paying far more in effective tax rates than that group is. So this shift would get us a lot more closer to being balanced, although quite frankly the middle class will still pay a little bit higher effective tax rate. So in terms of will that discussion ever go away completely, no, probably not. But it certainly gets us a lot closer, and it's a lot more fair.
And some of the criticism of that is that many small business owners, instead of paying a business tax, they actually pay a tax based on their income, and they feel that that could hurt small businesses. Have you heard comments like that from your constituents, Representative Simonson?
Yep, we've had a lot of discussions about that, especially early on before we really knew what the end result was going to be. But now we know that what this really does is it affects somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think it's 3.3, 3.4% of quote-unquote small business will be into this higher tax bracket. Most small businesses will not be impacted. They'll still fall into the lower bracket and really won't see an impact at all. And that holds true for our message that we're targeting those that can afford to pay the most.
All right, we'll move on to another issue now. Representative Murphy, there's been some discussion of folding the Duluth and St. Paul's teachers into the state's retirement association. And I know you serve on the pension commission, so I know you've had some interaction with this. First, explain why the Duluth and St. Paul teachers aren't already in that statewide teachers retirement association.
Because both plans are historically old, over 100 years old.
Created before the
Correct.
State one? Okay.
And before there were many, in the beginnings of big pension plans, there were many. And then in the 60s there was some consolidation. In the 80s there was some more. And in the 90s, there was some more. But the cities of the first class were generally separate from other consolidations in all kinds of plans, police and fire and transportation and PERA, all those, the cities of the first class were out of them. St. Paul and Duluth and Minneapolis were separate, and they had their own plans. And at various times, St. Paul and Minneapolis got state aids, or their cities got state aids for the teacher programs. But Duluth did not need them. Duluth has almost been 100% funding since they started 103 years ago. It was all, even in 2007 up to 2008, Duluth's plan was fully funded. There was one time they got 3 years of some assistance, and another time they had, I think it was 2 years of assistance. But since 2008, the demographics have changed as such with the Duluth plan that they are now saying they need help from the state, just as the other various pension funds have received. And so they're asking for help, and because of the changing demographics. One, charter schools were taken out of the local school pension fund and put into TRA. Lake Superior College was taken out of the Duluth Teachers Retirement Fund and put in state TRA.
So the pool has gotten smaller.
The pool has gotten smaller. Plus, at this time now, there are 1.5 retired teachers for every active teacher. And it doesn't look like the population for the Duluth schools is going to be rising in any considerable amount going into the next 10 years. So that leaves a bind, and that's where they're at. St. Paul is in a little bit different situation in that when some of the other funds reduced the benefits, they did not, but now they are. They are proposed. The plan, the pension plan that we have, has almost $1 billion of savings on liabilities built in it, with increased contributions from the employers and the employees, mostly the employees. And also, Duluth teachers have been, had no COLA, no cost of living increase, whereas TRA has and St. Paul teachers have in the past 3 years. Duluth has not had a COLA. And so the proposal before us is to bring them to 1%, and then everyone, TRA, St. Paul, and Duluth teachers would all be at a 1% COLA. So that's the only benefit increase in the Duluth proposal. It was a few years ago that Minneapolis came into TRA, and so then that left just TRA and Duluth teachers and St. Paul teachers, which are comparatively small with the whole of the TRA. And so there is a provision in the proposal that that's going to be before us on Wednesday on the House floor that says that by January 14th, or January 2014, we must have an actuarial study done with what the cost would be for TRA to accept Duluth Federation, or Duluth teachers' retirement and St. Paul teachers' retirements.
Representative Huntley?
Well, I sat on the Ways and Means Committee that heard Representative Murphy's bill late in the week. I can't remember what day it was. Thursday, and what struck me is how complicated this system is, and I had never even thought about this, but these teachers' plans when they started were completely funded by the state, and the employees did not participate in Social Security. And they still have retired employees that are collecting their pensions who are not and will never be eligible for Social Security. And so you got to treat that group entirely different than some of the other groups. Then you got some people that part of the time they were they were without Social Security, and then part of the time towards the end of their careers they were. And so to try to straighten this out and treat everybody fairly is extremely complex. And Representative Murphy's been doing that on this committee for a long time. I don't
17
know.
years.
17 years. And just to understand the complexity of this is amazing.
It sounds like eventually putting them all together, though, will start to cut back on a little bit of that complexity, even though some of these latent issues will probably be there for a while yet.
We did have Senator Pappas, who is the chair of the Pension Commission this year, and I had a meeting with the governor last week, and he said, shouldn't we have the same pensions for all public employees? And I thought, oh my gosh. I mean, that's really a huge problem, because that's police and fire, right. That's locals, that's county and city and PERA and state patrols and correction workers and everybody all being in the same. But, you know, it's a goal that never seemed possible even to talk about at one time, but it's coming as these consolidations take place in piecemeal, as they have done in the last 40 years. It's something that I'm sure is going to happen, but I'm not sure it's going to happen. I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen in Governor Dayton's term, but yeah. It takes time, and it takes the balance has to be good, because you can't just say, okay, drop a new plan into TRA, or say, or into PERA without funding with it.
Yeah. And back to the complexity of it, you can't compare one group of employees with another group. I mean, just look at police. You know, most of them retire in their mid to late 50s, and you know, do you want 60-year-old cops chasing 18-year-olds down the street? And no, you don't. And Erik's a firefighter. Do you want 65-year-olds hauling 80 pounds of stuff up a ladder? And you probably don't. And so how do you treat these groups that have completely different kinds of employment and needs the same, and you can't treat them all the same? And
folks like firefighters and police officers who put themselves in harm's way for their job, I mean, it is a dangerous job. Physically, sometimes injuries occur when you're in a firefighting situation. Representative Simonson,
and there is a part of the proposal that will be before us on Wednesday is for police police and fire too, and that is reducing the liabilities. And it's something that they've worked hard on for in a work group for 2 years to come up with a consensus of opinion that this is something they can work with.
Representative Simonson, do you foresee a time when that could happen, being with all these different types of government employees and different types of pension plans?
You know, consolidation is always going to be something to look at. I don't envision a time where we'll ever see one single plan for all public employees. It's just not feasible, right? Because, like for us, for example, we do not pay into Social Security at all. That's just not part of anything that we have, so that's not an option for us. whereas many basic public employees do pay into Social Security. So there's big differences there, but when I think back to the 90s when we in Duluth merged into PERA from our Relief Association, there was such tremendous resistance to doing that. And you'd have thought the world was coming to an end, but you know, looking back now, it was a really smart move. And I think even the loudest complainers will tell you now that it was a good idea. So sometimes it just takes having this conversation for a number of years and a good working group to come up with ideas. And when we talk about, you know, reducing liabilities, what that really means is benefit concessions, right? So, and that's an unfortunate reality that we're facing right now.
Representative Huntley, did you have additional comment?
No, people are different, and their jobs are different, and somehow we need to adjust the benefit program to fit that.
And could I say one more thing?
Sure.
Because I think a pension discussion is going to in the past 2 weeks, I've received emails from people from up on the range that say that we should be considering an early retirement incentive for one group of public employees, and that this would help the plan a lot. And then these people could have early retirement. The state could hire then people at the younger rate, and that would help the state because they would have less wages, because the younger people get paid less than people at the top of their scale. And that makes, all those things are true. But that does not, an early retirement incentive does not help the plan's stability. The early retirement incentive puts more people retired without as much money coming in to the plan. And that's one of the problems that some of the plans are having. And so that is not going to happen this year. There are going to be no retirement incentives out there for any early retirements because that costs too much to the plan.
All right, well, we've had a good discussion of pension plans, and if anybody has any questions, please call them in. I do want to remind you that you are watching Minnesota Legislative Report, and it's your opportunity to ask questions of our lawmakers who are serving us in St. Paul, just like Cindy and Cloquet did. And Cindy asks Representative Simonson, common question, why does the property tax in Carleton County continue to go up while property values decrease? She says she's made no additions or large changes to her property. And property taxes is one of the issues that the legislature doesn't have full control over because there's local governing bodies that propose it, but yet the legislature does have an impact on it.
You're right, and we do have a major indirect impact on local property taxes, you know, whether we like to think so or not. Because we, being the state of Minnesota, we provide aid to cities, we provide aid to counties. And it is those aids that really impact, you know, how they put their budget together. So over the last 10 or so years, as we've reduced aid to counties and to municipalities, those counties and municipalities have had to make choices. And they've made cuts. But at the same time, they have services that they need to provide their residents. And the only other opportunity that they have to generate revenue is to raise local property taxes. And that's just part of their equation. But as we look as a state at how do we influence a reduction in property taxes, the best way that we can probably do that is by A, generating growth, and B, providing significant amounts of aid to cities and counties based on their unmet needs, which in turn, in theory, should help them keep property taxes stable.
But Cindy may also want to talk with her local
Absolutely.
County
Yeah.
and school district. Go to those hearings that when you get your tax assessment, your preliminary assessment, there's always a meeting dates on there, and make your voice heard.
Yep.
As a former representative of some of the Carleton County, I also would like to remind you all that population has grown in Carleton County, and so that means the cities and the school districts have additional service demands or people are saying, hey, we need this. And they, in some cases, water lines have to be installed, and in other cases, more school rooms have to be added.
So it's always that, that pull between we want this, but we don't want to pay for it, and that doesn't really work. Karen from Cloquet was listening to the pension plan conversation, Representative Murphy, and she has a question. Why can teachers in Minnesota get away with double dipping? And I'm assuming she means that they're getting both Social Security retirement benefits and teachers' retirement benefits. Would that be considered double dipping?
I don't know if that would be considered double dipping. In some people's minds, I suppose it would. But the major plans, pension plans in Minnesota have a thought that pensions should be thought of as kind of like a three-legged stool, and each leg should be a component of your pension future. And one is personal savings, 1/3. One is Social Security. And the third is the state contribution, in which most cases the employees, the state employees or the county employees or the city employees are paying probably more than the employer. But those three things would make a complete pension package. And if you don't have one of those three, then it has to be made up somewhere else, usually by the employee and the employer's contributions.
And they
but
are paying.
No plan is planned. We have no state plan, no city plan, no county plan that has the idea that you can go and live on this pension without personal contribution too, in addition to what you've paid as part of your pension.
And if they are getting Social Security funding, they also paid into Social Security throughout their career.
That's
so
correct.
They aren't getting a free benefit.
And their employer did too.
Right, right. We have a call from Kimmer in Duluth, and Representative Huntley, Kimmer is wondering, do legislators pay Social Security taxes?
Some do,
some do, and some don't. They're getting to the confusion. I do not, but then I don't get any additional Social Security. My legislative pension will be paid primarily by my contributions in there, plus I think a lesser amount from the state. We get, I can tell you we get, or I get, I don't know about the other people who had the opportunity to do both Social Security and this recently. I will get about $1,000 a year for every year I'm in the legislature. Okay. So it's not a huge pension.
And since 1997, they're not on the state pension, they're on a 401.
Right. 401k?
401k. But they have the choice of going into Social Security or not.
Okay. So the rules
when
have
they
changed
select
over
their
time.
401, yes. The rules changed, and so there's no, the legislative plan will be out after the 97s are in control. After 97s are in real control.
All right. One question that we haven't talked about so far on Minnesota Legislative Report this year, Sherry from Grand Marais is calling about the proposed non-ferrous copper mining, copper nickel mining mines that are under consideration. And she's wondering, what do the legislators think about that possible mining concerning the jobs and the environment? Do you support it or not? We'll start with Representative Simonson. Is that an issue that you've weighed in on or have thought about? You're a freshman in the legislature, so this might be the first time people have heard your opinion on this.
Well, you know, this is something that came up a number of times in the campaign, but honestly, it has not come up one time since we started session in any conversations that I've had, and it just really surprises me. And partially because the process is ongoing and they're working through their permitting process, and there's nothing certainly before the legislature right now to either change something or expedite anything. So I think it's working through the process, and my position has been all along that, you know, I'm for responsible mining, and we need to certainly protect our environment and respect the laws that are in place. And from what I've seen, that they're working through the process. And, you know, beyond that, I've not had any specific conversations about the project.
Representative Murphy, what about you? You've been in the legislature for a while. There have been bills that have come through over past sessions dealing with these issues.
There have, and listeners, longtime listeners will always remember that I've always been a proponent of the Natural Resources Research Institute that came about in the early years that I was in the legislature. And the Natural Resources Research Institute, part of the University of Minnesota, was created with the idea that we could do research to make investments in industry and jobs and environment all work hand in hand. Now this year, the director, the only director that's a Natural Resources Research Institute is leaving. Mm-hmm. But we had a nice conversation during the November, maybe October. And he said, Mary, you have to believe, if you believe in the Natural Resources Institute, and you've talked about how many jobs have been created because we had this research done on environment and mining, you have to believe that they can be done together. We can have a clean environment with the investments that are being made and in the industry. And I do believe in the Natural Resources Research Institute, and I believe everything that Mike Lawlich has ever told me. But I think that people have to be on watch too, as part of that. And we have to understand, and we have to ask questions. And there's a place for that within the permitting processes, and that's what's being done. I don't believe, and I've said that before, I don't believe that we should make shortcuts for the permitting processes to take place. The federal and state processes were established for a purpose, and I think that the people that are in the permitting processes now, and the meetings that I've attended, when Representative Kravac was having his quarterly meetings with all stakeholders in the permitting process, they revealed a lot of what had to be done, and some things took longer than the assigned times, and that time was given. And so I think the investors in the process will keep their patience and follow along, and the process will reveal weaknesses or more trials that have to be done. But I don't think that, I do think that we are going to go on, and that the investment will be made, continue to be made, and that there will be mining.
And Representative Huntley, would you like to
give
your
I
point
would
of view?
agree that for some of these procedures or ways to extract the minerals, there's a serious problem with sulfur. And what are you going to do with the sulfur they use, and is that going to get in the environment or not? And so I support going through the regular process to make sure that it's safe. But I also am well aware that if it hadn't been for the iron mining industry, Duluth would probably be half the size it is right now. We wouldn't have the shipping industry that we have if it hadn't been for initially for mining. So it is very important, but we also have to protect the environment.
All right, and I'm sure that won't be the last time we get questions about non-ferrous mining on this show, but that'll be good for today. Representative Simonson, Dick from Duluth has a question. He is wondering, is there a limit how much business property taxes are allowed to increase in a single year? I think there are some businesses in Duluth that hadn't had an assessment made for a long time that are getting a pretty big increase, so I'm not sure if that applies to that. But are there any kind of limits that you're aware of on how much a business's property tax could go up in a given year?
Well, I think this was one of the things that'll have to be decided here before we pass this final budget, is if there's going to be anything put into place going forward with respect to levy limits. Because of course with local property taxes, school board, county, those are local decisions in terms of, you know, what they're going to raise in terms of taxes. But the question will be is if the legislature going forward is going to, you know, have levy limits in place or not. It's a discussion that will probably happen in conference committee, if it's going to happen at all. But it's a good question, and obviously, you know, our concern is that what we're trying to do is reduce property taxes, or at least minimize the increases as much we can, with as little control as we have at this state.
Representative Huntley, are you hearing complaints from business owners in your district about property taxes going up quite high for them?
I have not heard that complaint. I've heard gotten a lot of complaints from around the state from small businesses about the proposed minimum wage increase.
No questions about minimum wage yet today, but you never know. One question, it doesn't directly, it isn't a state legislative issue, but it's an interesting question. Sue from Hibbing is wondering, Representative Huntley, if the federal sequester cuts have been impacting things going on in Minnesota, and what kind of impacts the sequester cuts might be having on Minnesota.
So far they're not too bad, except for if you happen to fly in and out of St. Cloud and a few other places in the state, and they got rid of a number of the traffic controllers. My understanding is the feds have just passed a law to undo that. So that problem may go away, but there are some serious issues coming up, not so much on medical assistance, which I deal with, which is a huge part of the state budget. It's about 90, well, Health and Human Services is a third of the state budget, and about 90% of that is medical assistance. And there are very few proposed cuts from sequestration affecting medical assistance. There are some, it hasn't happened yet, but the health department gets a lot of money from WIC, which is Women, Infant, and Children, which goes to help not so much welfare families, but just lower income families with a number of items, and that could be sequestered if they decide to do that. But medical assistance, which would be nursing homes, people with disabilities, should not be anything bad there.
And Representative Simonson, I noticed you nodding your head when we talked about the federal sequester cuts. Some impact that you're aware of? Yeah,
we've had some discussions. I've had a number of discussions with some folks in Duluth about the impact of the sequestration on Head Start program, which essentially, if the state wouldn't have stepped in or is making an attempt to step in, would have eliminated a number of Head Start programs across the state. So in our K-12 education finance bill that we passed last week, I think we included an amount just a little over $2 million that essentially will keep the lights on for Head Start going forward, and hopefully keep the program up and running, at least provide them enough funding so that they don't have to close classrooms down. But that's such an important program that, you know, we didn't want to see go away because of the impact of what the feds have done.
It just shows, you know, government at every level under stress, state, local, and federal levels. Tony from Cook has a question, Representative Huntley, and he is wondering concerning the new health care plan. I believe he's talking about the Affordable Care Act. Will everyone have to have a supplement to their Medicare?
The Affordable Care Act does not include anybody above 65, so that it will not affect the people that are on Medicare.
Okay.
Now, they should, if they can certainly afford it, they should have a Medicare supplement, because what that part of Medicare does is pay for your doctor bills if you're not getting treated in a hospital. And a lot of us, when you get to be my age and older, spend more time with doctors than we used to, and if you don't have insurance to cover, it's expensive.
And one issue we've talked about education pension, teacher pensions, but one issue we haven't talked about yet today is that the House and Senate now have both passed their education bills, and the details will be worked out in conference. But what are the basics in the education bill? I know we don't have anybody here that sits on the education committee, so I'm not sure who might want to take this one on to start, but some changes. One thing I heard is no more graduation testing for seniors was one issue that got some attention this week. Representative Huntley, what do you know about the education bill?
Well, I mean, that was the big issue, I think, is testing, and we've had a long experience now. I forget how many years we've been doing this testing, and it doesn't seem to work very well. It was hoped it would be an incentive to get the system to do a better job of treating kids, but that does not seem to be working very well. So they're looking at different approaches to figure out how to improve the K-12 system. I will say that the number one thing the government can do for the economy is make sure we have the best trained workforce in the world, and that is extremely important. Right now we have close to a third of the kids in Minnesota that are really not doing very well. And if they can't get the education they need to go out and be successful employees, and I'm not talking about sending everybody to college. Not everybody should go to college, and not everybody wants to go to college. And there's plenty of good jobs you can get that don't require a college education that probably pay more than some of the college grads are going to get, but they all require good skills. And so we have to make sure that we're training everybody in our K-12 system so that number one, they will graduate, and number two, they will be well trained enough to go into some kind of a training program where they can get a good job when they get done. And we're not competing with Iowa and Wisconsin. We're competing with China and India, and our economy depends on the workforce. You go to talk to any business person, and 95% of them will say the most important thing is the quality of their workforce.
The education bill is keeping its promise of paying back the shift. We're also paying about $209 per student additional across the state in K-12.
And that should help some
And
of
we're
the
having
smaller
all-day,
districts.
everyday kindergarten paid for by the state.
Right, right. So good news for the schools that are struggling, get a little additional funding. And how is that being paid for, Representative Murphy? It's just, where's the money coming from for that additional?
From Erik's tax bill.
Everything comes from the tax bill.
Everything comes from the tax bill. Speaking of Representative Simonson, you serve on the Public Safety, Finance, and Policy Committee this year. Obviously makes a lot of sense being that you're a firefighter yourself. Is there any significant legislation that your committee has heard this session that you'd like to talk about as far as public safety goes?
Well, you know, we've had a lot of discussions about a lot of things, and we didn't have a huge increase in spending target this year, obviously, but I think we did some really good things in the areas of corrections. One thing that we did that's really specific to Duluth and I thought was exciting, it was a bill that I carried, but we're going to invest, I think, $300,000 over the biennium into a reentry program here in Duluth. And it's been going on for a number of years, but this is another one-time appropriation where folks that are coming out of prison and are willing to make a commitment to the program that are from Duluth or are going to stay in Duluth will be able to get some help with job training and you know, getting back into society and finding housing and things like that. So I think that's an exciting program. And we were just able to do a number of other smaller things, but it was a good discussion many times over.
Yeah, if I could just, in that particular area, one of the things where Duluth had a big leadership role was in young girls, and it's really not even women, it's girls that are being sex trafficked and turned into prostitution. Duluth had a major public outcry against that. The police chief has been very outspoken and pushing for us to do something. I think it was in 2011 we passed a law that said that these young girls were not criminals, they were the victims of the system. And so now we've set up this year a number of programs to help these young girls. And in my particular bill, Susan Allen from the Twin Cities got $3 million to basically set up programs to help these young girls. And in the housing bill, there was $2 million to provide housing for these young girls and women. And the Public Safety Committee, some of you may remember Mike Paymar, used to be on the city council, and he's now represents St. Paul, and he is the chair of the Public Safety Committee, and he got money in his bill to help train police to learn how to deal with this particular problem. So it's a big issue, and it was really brought to our attention by the folks in Duluth, at least to my attention, because they were very, very active in this.
All right, well, thank you for that update. And Representative Simonson mentioned some money from the public safety bill. The bonding bill is something that we haven't talked a lot about. And where is the bonding bill right now, Representative Huntley, and what kind of money might be coming to our region?
Well, I don't know the exact amount, but my understanding is that right now the Senate is really not moving ahead very much on the bonding bill. Normally this would not be the year that we would do a bonding bill. It's usually the next year that we would do that, but some of us believe that the economy is moving so slowly that we do need to stimulate it. And you do that by putting people to work, by building projects that are good projects that need to be built anyway. So this is a way to stimulate the economy, which I don't think Washington has done nearly enough on. In fact, there's lots of news in the last week about austerity versus stimulus, and I'm spacing his name right now, but he's a recent Nobel laureate in economics, Krugman, and he has always been pushing this. When you have a recession, government should put people to work. When you're not in a recession, then government can back off. But and he did not think we did enough in this last recession, and certainly the recovery is very slow. But I will say we're doing better than the European countries are doing.
We have a call from Beth in Duluth, and again, Representative Huntley, I think you're best qualified to answer this question. She says the changes in the new Medicare bill are not allowing her to obtain the prescriptions she needs. Is there a way for her to appeal and obtain this medicine now? Of course, Medicare is a federal program, not a state program.
Yeah, that's a federal program, and she may be talking about what's the infamous donut hole, which means they would pay for the first part of your drugs, and then after a certain amount, they would quit for a significant amount of dollars, and then they would pick it up at the other end. And most people, seniors, can't afford that donut hole thing. And I don't know the specifics of the question, but it may be that there are some drugs that are not authorized by Medicare. I don't know about that, and others that are.
All right, and that's a question that she may want to call her congressperson about that and find out more. We just have a couple of minutes left before we will say goodnight tonight, but Representative Simonson, you serve on the Transportation Policy Committee. I'm just wondering about transportation policy this session. Anything new to talk about that viewers might be interested in transportation?
Oh, we had a lot of discussions in transportation this year about projects, and you talk about wanting to stimulate the economy and do some much needed road and bridge work. But again, this is one of those things where everybody wants but nobody wishes to pay. And we have significant need in this state for a major investment in transportation networks, especially in our highways and our roads and bridges. So we had a lot of discussions about what we can do and how we do it and how do we pay for it. But unfortunately, right now, with all the other things that are happening and the monies that are needed, right now maybe is not the best time to seek another funding source for that. But we've got to do something soon because our network of highways is failing us, and we need to make some serious investments going forward.
And that's why we need a bonding bill.
I do know from talking with MnDOT, Northeastern Minnesota has a very large list of projects this year, one of the biggest project years that we've had, but of course the funding that Representative Simonson talking about will be going forward in future years. So.
Right.
Well, we have basically run out of time this week. Representative Huntley, Representative Murphy, Representative Simonson, thank you very much for spending your Sunday afternoon with us, and good luck at the legislature next week. That's all the time we have this week, but thanks to the lawmakers who joined us in the studio and to everyone who called with the question. We'll be back again next week for another edition of Minnesota Legislative Report. For the crew here at WDSC TV, I'm Greg Grell. Have a good evening.